So I was at Sundance International Film Festival 2021 through the magic of the internet. I saw a bunch of movies and I'm gonna talk about them now. We're going through these worst to Betsy. First, I'd like to give a shout out to a film called The Blazing World. I made it about 15 minutes into the movie before skipping through the rest of it because it was so awful. Terrible acting, terrible directing, terrible cinematography, terrible editing, terrible shitty looking CG. It's like a Neil Breen film if he made movies that were really, really boring. Many of the aspects in this film feel as though they should belong in a comedy, but it's not. It's trying to be a weird horror movie with lots of personality, but it misses the mark on everything it does. The film has zero self-awareness, and I could not handle it. I gave up. I am sorry. Check this one out if you wish to die of cancer. 1 out of 10. Next, I saw Rodney Asher's A Glitch in the Matrix. This is from the same director as one of the worst documentaries I've ever seen in my entire life, Room 237. I made a video on this documentary back in 2013. It's pretty funny. You should watch it. Like, the video, not the movie. Anyway, Rodney Asher has certainly improved since then. The music, editing, and overall presentation was about 1 billion times better than Room 237. Much like Room 237, this documentary is essentially just a bunch of interviews from crazy people, except instead of talking about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, they are discussing the theoretical possibility that we're all living in a simulation, which is an interesting subject that I would like to see a documentary on, but unfortunately Rodney Asher doesn't understand how to tackle his documentary subjects in any kind of intelligent or meaningful way. It really did not take very long at all for the conversations in this film to devolve into some Mandela Effect style bullshit. I shit you not, the people being interviewed in this film say things like, I organize my schedule in a 12-day week instead of the 7-day week like most people do because 12-day weeks make more sense. Anyway, I started noticing that weird things were happening to me on the 12th day of every week, so only on my schedule things would happen to me in a weird way, and I noticed a pattern, and then I started thinking maybe I'm in a simulation, and then I realized that it has to be because weird things don't happen otherwise. There was a sign on the street that wasn't there before, and now it's there. It must be a simulation. How else could a sign become on the street where it wasn't before? I realized that I was made up of code when I entered a sensory deprivation tank and went into a meditative state because that was when I felt like I was made up of code, and I sat there in this meditative state in this deprivation tank thinking, wow, I must be code right now. Like, the human body is so weird. When I was at church one day, I was realizing when we were all singing that everybody was basically forcing air out of their meat flaps to vibrate and make a sound, and I started thinking about it, and it was so weird, and that's when I realized that none of this is real because it was too weird. Weird things don't exist. Like, there are compelling arguments to make for the probability of life existing within a simulation, but the film instead decides to spend its time focusing on random idiots babbling on about nothing. There is no distinction between any of the arguments in this film, and they are all given equal weight. There's also significant portions of this film dedicated towards glorifying Elon Musk. There was a part of the film that showed writer Philip K. Dick saying, I believe that there is an alternate reality taking place in the present. I have seen it, and you can believe me or not believe me. Anyway, while I was on drugs, I saw this documentary is really that stupid. I guess you can argue that this film is not necessarily agreeing with the ideas presented by the people interviewed in this film, but either way, this documentary doesn't really serve much purpose at all when you can just go on the internet and see crazy people there instead. The animations were cool. I liked those. It's available now if you would like to watch it. I made it about 40 minutes before giving up. How about you? This one's getting a 4 out of 10. Yeah, boy. Another film I saw was Prisoners of the Ghostland, and unfortunately, despite how you might abbreviate it, it was not very pog. This is from Japanese director Sion Sono, who's directed Love Exposure and Suicide Club. I haven't seen every one of his movies, but so far I haven't really been wowed by any of them. Anyway, in this film, he decides to capitalize on the meme power of Nicolas Cage. He's making quite the comeback as a B movie star, and I love watching Nicolas Cage's freakouts. I find them very entertaining, but unfortunately, that is not most of this movie. Most of this film is pretty boring. The film actually starts out pretty promising. They definitely utilize the yelling, angry Nicolas Cage thing. There's some really weird things going on in terms of the style and aesthetic of this film. It's a big mishmash of Japanese and Western film culture. You got katanas and samurais and sheriffs and saloons and neon signs and a whole bunch of nonsense. This film knows that it's wacky and ridiculous, and its best parts are when it really owns those aspects, but unfortunately a large portion of this movie takes itself way too seriously. There are really cliched attempts at dramatic cues that feel just so incredibly empty, and despite the wacky world that's presented in this film, they just don't really do much with it at all. There's like 2 locations in the entire movie. It feels like kind of a wasted opportunity like Cyberpunk. In concept, it sounds really ambitious, but in practice, they just didn't really do anything with it. Overall, this movie just feels really cheap and low production value. There's also really nothing great about the way the film was shot or directed. There are way too many important pieces of action in this film that take place off-screen, and it's not done in a way where it's more effective because of your imagination or something. It's done in a way that only feels cheap, lazy, and confusing. Some of the action in this film is just plain incomprehensible. It's not bad to be funny, it's just poorly thought out and poorly filmed. Despite how wacky and weird the aesthetic of this film is, it simultaneously tries way too hard to be cool. This is made abundantly clear by the music choices in the film. There are plenty of sequences where the film is clearly expecting the audience to care about what's going on, but unfortunately there are no interesting or relatable characters. There's nothing interesting about the plot or the universe. A lot of character motivations in this film are very poorly communicated, which is impressive given how simple the story should be. The acting in this film was not great. Every English-speaking actor was annoyingly LARPy, and every Japanese actor attempting to speak English was incomprehensible. Do not attempt to watch this movie without subtitles because you will not understand anything that's going on. Now, despite my criticisms, there were some enjoyable moments in the film. There were a couple moments where the ridiculous aspects were pretty funny. There were a few moments here and there where Nicolas Cage was hilarious, and there was one death that I really liked. But overall, this film was really disappointing and incredibly forgettable. The universe was not very well fleshed out at all, and the entire experience felt very empty. Anyway, check this one out if you want. You might enjoy it, but I found it to be pretty boring, and I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. Thank you. Oh, let's go! Please, no, it's gonna happen again! It's gonna happen again! I'm gonna die! I'm gonna die! I'm dead!
You're gonna hella die.